David stood in shock at the entrance of the kitchen as he watched his wife, Diana, washing her pad inside a bowl. When she was done, she poured the reddish water into the soup she was preparing. It felt like a movie to him. He pinched himself twice to be sure he wasn't dreaming or hallucinating. But he was very disappointed, scared, and very furious at the same time when he realized it was real. David was a very wealthy young millionaire who inherited his father's company after his father's death. He met Diana during an interview. She came to the company in search of a job, and David fell deeply in love with her at first sight. He employed her into the company because he was attracted to her. Some months later, they started a relationship. They both loved each other deeply and passionately. However, David had a very serious flaw that he couldn't overcome. This flaw was the fact that he was a very chronic womanizer who found it difficult to be faithful and loyal to one woman. David had a lot of women at his disposal because he was filthy rich, and a lot of beautiful women would often throw themselves at him even though they were aware that he was a womanizer. This was because they wanted him to fund their extravagant lifestyle. Diana knew this, yet she accepted to marry David when he proposed because of his wealth and influence. She felt that she would be able to change David and that giving him a child would transform their marriage. But even after David got married, he never stopped sleeping around with different women. His infidelity and promiscuity bothered Diana a lot, and she would often find herself hurting over David's inability to be faithful to her. She also tried her best to get pregnant for him, but 4 years after their union, she was unable to conceive. All her efforts to get a child were useless, and the doctors told her that she was perfectly fine. One fateful day, Diana and her best friend, Sandra, were at a hotel for a wedding event. Diana and Sandra had been friends right from the university. They also got married the same month. However, Sandra unfortunately lost her husband a few years after the wedding, making her a widow. The wedding ceremony the two friends went to had just ended when Diana and Sandra saw David entering a room in the same hotel with a younger-looking girl. Sandra was very sure that the man she saw was David, her friend Diana's husband. She quickly informed Diana.
"Isn't that your husband? The man entering the hotel room with a strange woman."
Diana knew it was her husband David, but she was very ashamed to admit that it was him. She knew that David was a serial womanizer, and she didn't want Sandra to know this. So she told Sandra to forget about whoever she saw, but Sandra persisted.
"Diana, I am sure that it is your husband and another woman. Why would you ask me to forget about it? See, let us go to that room that they entered and knock on the door. It will prove it to you."
When Diana realized that Sandra wouldn't back down unless she proved that David was indeed the man that entered the hotel room, Diana decided to tell her the truth. With tears in her eyes and a broken voice, she said to Sandra,
I know that the man you saw is David and another woman. Ever since we got married, David had been unfaithful to me from the first week till today. I pleaded with him to change his ways. I've done everything humanly possible to please him and stop him from looking at other women. But it's just impossible. So I just gave up and let him be.
Sandra became very shocked and surprised at the same time. She cleaned her best friend's tears and took her into an empty room inside the hotel. Sandra had always thought that Diana had the perfect husband and a perfect home. She envied Diana because she had the latest jewelry, the latest designer clothes, and the latest gadgets with a wealthy husband. She had no idea that Diana wasn't happy in her marriage. She felt very sorry for her best friend and tried to pacify Diana, who was already crying. Then she took Diana home. When they got to Sandra's house, Sandra came very close and sat beside Diana. Then she told Diana in a very soft and low voice,
"What if I tell you that there is something you can do to make your husband loyal and faithful to you alone?"
Immediately Diana heard this. Her eyes widened and she drew even more close to Sandra, with her ears itching to hear more. She asked Sandra,
"What do you mean? What is it that I can do to make David loyal to me and only me?"
Diana asked with curiosity written all over her face. Sandra observed Diana closely and could tell that she was very desperate and determined to do whatever it takes to ensure that David stopped sleeping around and remained faithful to her only. Then Sandra stood up, went to the door. She opened the door and looked outside to be sure that no one was listening. She went back to join Diana. Then she told Diana,
"There's a very powerful prophet I know. He's the one who helped me when my husband was still alive. My husband was a serial cheat like yours as well. But after I did what the prophet asked me to do, my husband stopped cheating on me and started showing me unimaginable love. He loved me more than his family members before his death."
Diana became even more curious and desperate. She asked Sandra quickly, "Where can we find this prophet? How can I meet him? I need him to help me as well, to win my husband's heart and make him love no other except me." Sandra told Diana not to worry. She picked up her phone and dialed the number. In a few minutes, the person on the other end picked up the call. He recognized Sandra's voice immediately and asked to meet them at home. The two women quickly prepared and went to the house of the prophet. When they got there, Diana explained her problem to him and pleaded with him to come to her aid, just like he helped her friend Sandra. The prophet brought out a calabash. He poured some water into it and asked Diana to wash her hands and legs in the water. When she was done, he washed his face with the same water. After cleaning his face, he told Diana that there was a way for her to capture her husband's heart and make him loyal to only her and no one else. However, he told her that the cost of what she wanted was very high and the repercussions could be disastrous. Diana told him, "I don't care what it costs. I am ready to pay you any amount of money and give you anything you ask for." The prophet smiled at her determination to do whatever it takes to cage her husband's heart. Then he told her,
"What you have to do to win your husband's heart is very, very simple. I will buy a special bowl for you and bless it. After seeing your period at due time, fill the bowl with clean water and wash your lining in it. Then use it to cook for him. If you do this, your husband would love no one else except you. He would be under your control, like a dog and its owner."
Diana was shocked at the words of the prophet. She felt he was a true man of God, who would give her scriptures of the Bible to pray with and convince her to bring her husband to his house for deliverance. She turned to Sandra and told him, "Did you just hear what he said? Do you know how unhealthy and dangerous that is?" But to her greatest surprise, Sandra wasn't surprised at all. Instead, Sandra told Diana,
"This is the only way you can stop David from cheating. That's exactly what I did as well to stop my late husband from cheating. I'm your friend. Trust me, I can never lead you astray."
Diana foolishly listened to Sandra and trusted her. She paid the prophet some money, and the next day, she returned to see him and take the bowl. When she took the bowl home, she kept it safely in the kitchen, away from anyone's reach. Then she waited patiently for her time of the month. As the days went by, the more she saw David with other women, the more determined she was and the harder her heart became. One fateful morning, she saw her period and she happily did as the prophet instructed. She washed her lining with water inside the bowl and used it to prepare David's favorite soup. When David returned from work that day, he was very famished and he couldn't resist the aroma of Diana's soup. So he ate and ate to his fill. The next morning, when Diana woke up, she couldn't find David beside her on the bed. She became very worried and scared, believing that something bad may have happened to him. She called out his name as loud as she could, but her screams met no reply. Then, she got out of her bed and started searching for David all over the house. When she walked past the kitchen, she heard a strange sound coming out from the kitchen. Diana slowly moved towards the kitchen door and opened the door. What she saw shocked her. She saw David inside the kitchen, standing in front of the gas cooker, preparing breakfast while listening to music from his headphones. That was the reason he couldn't hear her calling. Diana couldn't believe her eyes. Ever since she has known David, this would be the first time she would see him making a meal by himself. She smiled to herself and heaved a deep sigh of relief. She believed that the words of the prophet had come true. Diana walked closer to him and removed the headphones. David turned around to look at her and gave her a passionate kiss.
"Good morning, sweetie. Hope you had a great night,"
David asked. Diana smiled even brighter. It had been years since David last called her sweet names. They were merely living like flatmates and not a couple. In the days that followed, David became very loyal and passionate about Diana. He would buy her gifts and take her out on dates. Diana was pampered and showered with so much love. David stopped talking to other women and his entire focus was on Diana, his wife. Month after month, Diana would do as the prophet instructed and David remained faithful and loyal to her. But in the 5th month, everything changed for Diana. She woke up one morning, checked her calendar and discovered that it was past the time of the month already and her period was yet to show up. Diana suddenly had a mixed feeling. She quickly jumped out of the bed and rushed to the nearest hospital for a pregnancy test. After the test was carried out, it was discovered that Diana was pregnant. She couldn't believe her ears. She had wanted a baby for a very long time, but she was confused. She didn't know if to be happy or sad. She recalled the words of the prophet once again. You must make sure your husband eats a meal prepared with your menstrual blood every month, or else the consequences will be disastrous. This means you must not get pregnant. The words of the prophet echoed in her thoughts and sent a wave of fear down her spine. She couldn't abort the child as it was her first since she got married. After thinking for a while, she foolishly concluded that her husband would love her the most when he finds out that she would be having a baby. When David got home that day, Diana shared the news of her pregnancy with him. David was very happy. He embraced her passionately and promised to give her a new car. However, Diana's love story turned sour the next month. Unlike the previous days, when David woke her up with a romantic kiss on her forehead, David woke Diana up with the beating of her life. After he had finished beating her, he picked up his briefcase and left for work. Diana, who was in pain, was very confused and didn't know what had possessed David. She had bruises all over her face and her joints seriously ached. This would be the first time David would ever lay his hands on her since they knew each other and got married. She always knew David to be a cheat and a womanizer, but domestic violence was completely out of the equation. Diana called her friend, Sandra, who came to the house and took her to the hospital because she was very weak. When Diana was treated, she explained all that happened to Sandra. Sandra exclaimed at her narration. She asked Diana,
But the prophet warned you not to miss any month. Why didn't you take precautions to avoid getting pregnant? But we've been married for more than 4 years, and I haven't been able to get pregnant. How was I to know that something of this nature would happen?
Sandra felt very disappointed and sorry for Diana at the same time. She knew the consequences for disobeying the prophet. It was exactly what cost her the life of her husband and made her a widow. But she didn't reveal this to Diana. She hid it from Diana and simply told her that things would get better. When Diana got home that day, she met David already at home, waiting with a belt. Immediately she entered the house. David approached her with fury in his eyes, asking her where she was coming from. He didn't wait for Diana to explain before he gave her another severe beating. In the weeks that followed, Diana became a shadow of herself. David became a frequent abuser and became worse than he initially was before Diana met the prophet for help. When Diana's pregnancy turned 3 months old, David returned home very drunk one fateful night and was unable to enter the house because Diana had locked the door. He knocked and knocked, but Diana was deep asleep and couldn't hear the doorbell and the bangs on the door. The next morning, immediately Diana opened the door. David pounced on her and started beating her in rage. He continued beating her until he saw blood gushing out between her legs. Then he left her and walked away. The gateman, Adamu, saw what transpired and quickly went to Diana's aid after David went into the house. He rushed her to the hospital for treatment. But after Diana was stabilized, she was told that she had a miscarriage and lost the baby. Diana was deeply heartbroken. She didn't know what to do. As soon as she got home, she consoled herself with the fact that she would continue the rituals the prophet told her and win back the favor of her husband. Some weeks later, Diana fortunately saw her period and she was filled with excitement when she woke up that morning. Even David could tell that something was different with her. That day, Diana went into the market to get the ingredients to cook David's favorite soup. one that he wouldn't refuse no matter what. Then she rushed into the kitchen and brought out the bowl that the prophet gave her from where she hid it. When it was evening, she entered the kitchen and removed her pad. However, she was so excited and desperate that she didn't take the necessary precautions to ensure that she was alone. She had no idea that David would return very early from work that day. Because he wasn't feeling too well, so he asked the driver to drop him early at home. When David got home, he noticed how quiet the house was, unlike the previous days where he would meet Diana watching a movie in the living room. It was quiet and isolated. He walked slowly towards the kitchen and slowly opened the door. Immediately he opened the door, David stood in shock at the entrance of the kitchen as he watched his wife Diana washing her pad inside a bowl. When she was done, she poured the reddish water into the soup she was preparing. It felt like a movie to him. He pinched himself twice to be sure he wasn't dreaming or hallucinating, but he was very disappointed, scared and very furious at the same time when he realized it was real.
Diana!
He screamed at the top of his voice. Diana turned around and was visibly shocked when she saw David. She knew it was over for her. She went on her knees and tried to beg, but David pushed her aside and picked up a table knife inside the kitchen. Diana tried to run, but it was too late. David grabbed her by the hand and buried the knife deep within her abdomen. Diana screamed in pain and held her abdomen. Her scream alerted the gateman, Adamu, who quickly rushed into the house and straight to the scene to witness David holding the table knife and Diana struggling to remain conscious on the ground, where she laid in a pool of her own blood. David appeared to be in a trance. It was as though a spirit had previously possessed him and he didn't know what he was doing or how he got there. Adamu quickly called the police and David was arrested. Some months later, he was sentenced to a life imprisonment and Diana was laid to rest. The moral lesson of this story reminds us that we cannot get married to a man or a woman with a bad character, hoping that we will be able to change the person. What comes in a dubious way doesn't last forever. It always has an expiry date. Beware of your friends and carefully consider the advice they give you before you indulge in them. Never make any decision in desperation. Think twice before taking an action because the repercussions can be disastrous.